신성호 서브 강력하게 벤루카스가 받고 오른쪽 플러턴 다시는 신성호 최원빈 박예찬 빈자리로 가운데 쪽자 리 잘 받고 왼쪽에 네 우리도 잘 받았습니다. 이거 걸리는군요. 조지 프레이저.
In the summer of 2023, I went to South Korea for a week for my first time playing volleyball with the England team. In this video, I'll cover all the highs and all the lows from that trip. Before jetting off, I'll give you some background on how I ended up in the England team. So growing up, I never played for England as a junior. When I was in Norwich, there were no open trials, so I had no idea how the setup worked, to be honest. I'd see on Facebook that some of the people I knew from playing against the National Cup were going off to Nevza or playing for England or whatever, but that was about it as far as my understanding of how the England setup worked. Whilst we're on the subject, and in the interest of transparency, to be honest, when I was a kid, I was pretty put out by this, and it was quite disheartening and demotivating for me playing volleyball. So I think it's really positive now that there are open trials and it's a much more transparent system for how to get in to be an England junior. Anyway, I went to my first England senior camp about a week before my trial with Uppsala, so at the end of that last year I had in Sheffield. It was a 3-day camp at Kettering, and I played okay, but there was a lot of new faces there that weekend, so I think I probably blurred into the crowd a little bit. The following summer, after my first season playing in Sweden, I went to a 2-day camp in Staffs. And I think this one for me went about as well as it could have done. I think I've not just improved a ton playing in Sweden at that high level, but also my confidence had improved loads. So I really put my best foot forward at that camp and played some much better volleyball. That was the only camp I could go to that summer, as I was quite quickly back off to Sweden for pre-season. But thankfully I did enough to get picked, and I was in the squad that was going to be going to Korea. What actually was the tournament then? Well, it was the 2023 Munyeong Bunpatiban International University Volleyball Tournament. Munyeong was the place, Bunpatiban was the sponsor. 2023, I hope, doesn't need explaining. And then most, but not all of the teams were student teams, hence the university bit. There were 8 teams from 8 countries. We were the only fully national team going. The rest were either university, club, or regional teams. So you had England, of course, and then in our group we had UC Irvine, who play NCAA in America. You had the Queensland Pirates, a state team from Australia, and then a team from Vietnam, whose club name I'll put on screen, but I'm not going to try and pronounce. Then in the other group from Thailand, you had a team from the National Sports University. The Japanese team was students from Fukuoka University. From China, it was Shandong Young Men's Volleyball. And finally, from the host Korea, it was a sort of university all-star team. Then the format was a round robin in both groups, with the top 2 going through to the semi-finals and then the final. And then all of this would be played over a week with plenty of chances to train alongside that. And that was the plan. So before flying out to Korea, I had a few weeks back in Sweden for pre-season. We had a new coach and some new players, and obviously I'll cover all of that and more in the future videos about Sweden. The one relevant thing that I will mention now is he worked us really hard for pre-season. We did a lot of reps and a lot of S&C, and it was really brutal. Probably a bit too keen to make a good first impression. I was a bit reluctant to put my hands up and say, I need to stop. This is too much load for my knee. And so unfortunately, by the time we went to Korea, I was carrying a few injuries. I had an ab strain that I'd picked up that summer that I'd made worse. And then my jumper's knee had flared up quite a lot already. So slightly suboptimally, I was setting off to Korea, not in the best of physical health. So most of the team were flying together from London. I was going straight from Sweden. A few of the other guys were going straight from Denmark, where they play. I was really lucky in that I was able to go a few days early, which meant I'd have a bit of time to recover from the jet lag, but also then time to make the most of being in Korea and be a tourist in Seoul. When setting off, honestly, I felt fantastic. I was really viewing this as an adventure going off on my own to explore a new city. Those of you who watched my previous video about long COVID and anxiety know that I can get really, really bad anxiety that gets triggered by tiredness, just physical tiredness. And unfortunately, staying up on the flight to try to get used to the time zone was such a trigger. Once I landed in Seoul, my anxiety was really bad. That first evening there, just getting my bearings, walking around Seoul was both really lovely and amazing getting to explore this new city, but also quite horrific. It's probably the most anxious I've felt in my entire life. And again, I really don't know what I was anxious about. I just had this awful pit in my stomach. The next day though, after a good night's sleep and I was a lot less tired, was much better. I had a really lovely time exploring Seoul on my own for most of the day before then meeting up with the team in the evening. I've got to say, brief side note away from the volleyball, Seoul's a fantastic city, really recommend going. It's a bit of an odd one because it has the feel of a very old city because ostensibly it is, but as you walk around, you see loads and loads of buildings that they'll say that, oh yeah, built, 500, 1,000 years ago, this temple or this whatever. But then you look at it and read the plaque close, it says, oh, actually, but this physical building in front of you is like 20 years old because it got burnt down 5 times by the Japanese and we've only just rebuilt it. So it's a bit of an odd city, but that really adds to the charm. Anyway, so I rendezvoused with the team back at the airport that evening. This was my first time meeting a lot of the guys, as like I said, having not played as a junior, been away in Sweden the last year, only been to 2 camps, obviously hadn't interacted with a lot of players in English volleyball that much. We were met at the airport by Yellow. She was our liaison and translator for the duration of the tournament, and she was obviously absolutely invaluable, but also unbelievably lovely. We were really, really lucky to have her. She took us to our coach, which then drove us from the airport in Seoul to the hotel where we'll be staying just outside Myeong. We were staying about a 20-minute coach journey away from the venues where we'd be playing volleyball in a little village, again, just outside the actual city itself. And you basically had a high street with a load of shops and a few restaurants, and then our hotel at the end, and then keeping going off in the other direction was a hiking trail that goes off through the mountains and some very pretty old buildings. We were staying in a really nice hotel with all the other teams who were playing in the tournament. And I think it's once we got there that we really got a sense of how well looked after we were going to be and how professional the setup for the whole thing was. Because I think most of us were kind of going into this a bit blind and didn't really have a sense of what it was going to be like. But when we got there and we realized, okay, we've got a really nice hotel. All the other teams are here. We've got 3 meals a day in the hotel restaurant and the food's lovely. We've got nice air-conditioned big coaches to drive us to and from every game. Or if we want to go into town one day, they'll just take us. It felt like an extremely professional setup. And we were really lucky to get to experience that. I shared a room with Michael, and we actually played volleyball together as juniors for Norwich. So it was pretty cool to be on the same team again, now playing for England. Next morning, we were up for breakfast and then off to the venue we'll be playing most of our volleyball at for this week. I think it's fair to say this is the nicest venue any of us have ever or probably will ever play volleyball in. Arguments very quickly began about the height of the ceiling. More specifically, whether it would be possible to kick a volleyball into the ceiling or not. This would prove to be a source of fearsome debate and great entertainment as the week progressed. It was also our first chance to get a look at some of the other teams we'll be up against, and it was interesting to see them training and see how it was similar to us, but also how it differed. We warmed up next to the court, and then it was our time to train. Now, I'm not the most physical athlete in the world. I don't jump that high, and I'm not that strong or powerful. The one thing I do have going for me physically is my cardio is pretty good for a volleyballer, so I quite rarely get really out of breath compared to my teammates when playing. So when we were training that first day and I was ridiculously puffed in every rally, I kind of knew something was a bit off. I chalked it up to the jet lag and generally being tired and figured, well, maybe everyone else feels the same, but I was really struggling. That first training session was brutal. Interestingly, also, it was really, really humid and the volleyballs we were using were different from the Mikasa ones you normally get in Britain. The texture was much more like the molten ones you sometimes see. And I don't know if it was a combination of these two things or me just being a bit shit, but I really struggled to receive float serves overhand. But normally that's one of my biggest strengths playing volleyball is receiving float serves overhand, but I was absolutely hopeless. I must have sent 5, 10 during the wash drill into orbit. We then went back to the hotel for lunch and then off to a different venue this time to train again. And this second session killed me. I really enjoyed it and I thought I played okay, but afterwards I felt very unwell. Not just tired, but sick. Either way, I told myself as we got back on the bus, look, it's the first day done. You've got all your nerves and the tiredness hopefully out of your system. Good night's sleep. You'll feel right as rain in the morning. I didn't. Unfortunately, I still felt really ill. I thought to myself, look, okay, you've got training. You don't feel too bad whilst playing. It's usually before and afterwards. So just get your head down, warm up, crack on with it, and you'll get through it. Which ostensibly is what I did. I did warm up, I did play, and I did get through it. But afterwards, I felt unbelievably bad. Easily the most unwell I've felt since having long COVID when it was at its worst. It took me about an hour to eat lunch, and everyone else had buggered off to their rooms afterwards. And I just sat on my own, picking at my food, really trying to force myself to eat because I just couldn't stomach eating. I felt so ill, but I knew I had to. Then back in my room after lunch, I tried to go through all my normal mechanisms when I'm feeling really ill, mixed up with anxiety and long COVID. So meditation, breath work, journaling, talk to my family and Meg. Unfortunately, none of it really helped. At the risk of sounding a bit dramatic, I genuinely didn't think I was going to survive the week. The trouble was then I was also getting really in my head that, oh God, this is my first trip with the England team and I'm going to make a dreadful first impression, stopping playing after like the second day because of some invisible illness that no one really understands, making me feel really tired and sick. Or maybe somehow I can dig deep and make it through the week, but then I get back to Sweden and I'm really toast because I've got to go straight back to work and training and playing every day in Sweden. Or what if my knee goes or my ab strain gets worse and then I can't play for those reasons? And then I've come all this way for nothing, wasted all this money and energy on myself. Not just that, but I've also robbed someone else of the opportunity to come and not just have this experience themselves, but contribute to the team. I'll be sat there contributing nothing. And what will everyone think? And what will they say? Blah, blah, blah. So at this point, I messaged Simon, our coach, to ask for a chat. And I went up and explained basically my situation with long COVID, with anxiety and the fatigue this all generates. And he was really, really good and understanding about it. And this went a really long way to alleviate lots of the anxiety about what's going to happen when I go back to Sweden, because he said, we can manage the load, it's fine. And what's everyone going to think? Because I'd spoken to the head coach and he was extremely understanding. And then alleviating the anxiety symptoms obviously helps massively for reducing the fatigue. So this helped a ton. So I went back to the room feeling a lot more optimistic about the week and more positive generally. Unfortunately, though, obviously this wasn't a silver bullet. So I still felt quite anxious a lot of the time and a lot more fatigued than I would have liked, but still much better than I had done a few hours ago. Our first game was that afternoon against UC Irvine from the States. Going into Korea, based on how I played at the selection camp just beforehand, I was somewhat hopeful that I might start because I thought I'd played pretty decent. But understandably, given how I'd played at training since getting here and then the talk I just had with Simon about load management, I wasn't surprised nor particularly disappointed to not be starting. We arrived in plenty of time before our game, and this was always really enjoyable to get to sit in the stands and watch the other teams playing their matches, especially the Asian teams, as their play style differed so much from how we played. So we were going to be playing against a strong NCAA team, and I think honestly, everyone going into this kind of thought we were going to get killed. I think some described this game as a free hit beforehand. Basically, no pressure because no one's really expecting us to win. We can go out without fear, have a crack at it and see how we get on. Full disclosure, I think we're a little bit lucky they didn't have a few of their most senior players. One of their guys, I think, played VNL for France, and he arrived later in the week after we'd already played them. So that obviously helped. But either way, you can only beat what's put in front of you, and we did. I think we surprised ourselves a bit with the level we were able to compete at. But winning this wasn't just obviously helpful for our standing in the tournament, but was a massive confidence boost to tell us we can compete at a much higher level than we thought we could. After the games were done, most evenings it was a pretty similar pattern. Back to the hotel to shower and for some scran, and then your time's your own. Again, anyone who's watched my previous video about anxiety playing volleyball won't be surprised to hear before games I wasn't exactly loving life. I always enjoyed playing when I got on, and then when the day's volleyball was done, I usually felt pretty good, more or less my normal self. I really enjoyed this time then together as a team, getting to know the other guys better. It's a really good cultural environment to be in, both at dinner, just chatting, and then going back to someone's room, playing cards or FIFA afterwards, or as we naturally would do given we're in Korea, going off to explore. The next few days would follow a similar pattern, training in the morning and then a game against either Australia or Vietnam in the afternoon. First up were the Aussies. With Bestow's dismissal at the Ashes fresh in our memories, we obviously had a score to settle, and we came out swinging, win the first set 25-21. As I said earlier, I'm not sure any of us really knew exactly what to expect coming into this tournament, and we're maybe a little nervy that we could be out of our depth and get embarrassed a little bit by some of the teams. And now at this stage, having won the first game and gone a set up in the second, I think we've put any of those fears to bed. We put in a good showing and had a really good chance of getting a second win. Not all was said and done though, and Australia came back to win the next two sets. This trip, having been 18 months ago, makes it kind of hard to provide a lot of analysis about the game, as frankly, I can't quite remember how it went in terms of what we did well or what changed from the Aussies to step up and put us under the cosh. I came off the bench a little bit in this one to serve and pass. I was more focused on trying to put in a decent innings than thinking about playing for my country, etc. But looking back, obviously, it's quite special to have played for the national team, and I couldn't really have asked to have done it in a better arena. We came back into things well though, won the fourth set to take it to a fifth. Unfortunately, I don't have the footage from past 7-10 in the first set as I think the stream froze, but we won the fifth set. So we're now 2 wins from 2 going into our last group match against Vietnam. So the American and Australian teams both played quite similar styles of volleyball to us. I think they were the physically biggest teams there, and then again the style was more similar to what most of us would be used to facing in the West. Vietnam, however, was wild. They weren't a huge team, but they ran a really different offense, running combos constantly. You can see in so many of these rallies, players trying to run crossovers or pretending to run a crossover and then running normally but off a small approach, or doing whatever they can to throw off the block defense. Also, and I don't know if this is how they coach it or it's just a quirk of this player, but their setter set from a really weird angle where he jumped almost parallel to the net, which all just felt very strange. It completely worked though, as they blew us out of the water in the first set. Massive credit to the coaching team though and the guys on court for how they adjusted, as we managed to adapt to put up a much better fight with our block defense, taking the second set 32-30. Unfortunately, it didn't lead on to the comeback we might have hoped for. Maybe we were just too drained from the excitement of the second set. As is often the case in sport, after a really close, high-energy set, one team drops their level considerably in the next, and unfortunately, it was us. We got rolled 25-11. In the fourth set, we reset and put up a much more respectable fight, lost 25-22. Shame to have not held this level the whole game, but if you had your score doubled in 2 sets, you can never really complain about losing the match. Still, 2 wins from 3 puts us second in our group, so we'll be going into the semi-final against the team top in the other group, which was the hosts, South Korea. We just had training the next day, so that evening after the game, we got the coach into Mungyong proper for more of an explore of the city. That was great fun, and again, amazing to explore more of Korea, and really valuable time for us to bond more as a team. I think it's the nature with national teams generally. Obviously, there's some famous examples like with football around the golden generation, but that you spend lots of time playing against some of these players and can build up little rivalries or start to grow not to like them. So it's really important you get loads of time together so you can get over this and bond as a team. I think this teaches you a really valuable lesson as an athlete to not take shithousery from other players too personally. I think far too often you see someone getting wound up through the net during a game, and then instead of leaving it there, they then think, oh, the person who's done that in life is actually just an arsehole, which is almost never the case. They're just trying to wind you up. And if it was someone in your team doing it, you think they're a legend. It's literally just tribalism. So again, then getting to play with these people as part of your national team really helps you to see through this in the future. So the next day was our final training session, which meant we had one very important score to settle. Debate had been raging all week about whether you could kick a football into the extremely high ceiling, and people were generally split into one of 4 camps. The first was spearheaded by Captain Zach, whose view could be summarized as, can you kick a volleyball into the ceiling? Yes, obviously. Then you had a view championed by Libero Chester, which was maybe if the stars align, you really got hold of it, you could do it, but realistically, you're just going to slice it. Then you had me saying it's literally impossible, maybe doable if you're a professional footballer, but realistically, none of us have been able to give it enough beans. And then the final group, which was the majority of the players, whose view never really strayed far from, are you really still arguing about this? Conscious of not living up to our country's reputation as being rowdy Brits aboard just trying to play football everywhere, we saved testing it to the end of the last training session, and I'll let the video speak for itself.
Oh, got it. Oh, there we go.
So, with that now sorted, we could focus on the volleyball again. And this is the biggie, semi-final against host South Korea. Adding to the professionalism of the whole tournament, the semi-final and final were going to be broadcast on Korean TV on the Seoul broadcasting service. And we were able to watch the other games on the TVs in our room. As for opposition, the Koreans were very, very good. It was obvious watching them play that they were a really good team. Some of their players, I think, played for the senior national team, and they even had one guy who was 216 centimeters, that's 7'1". Whatever happened in the game, it's just amazing to reflect on getting to play in this environment. I'm so lucky and grateful to have gotten to experience this. It's a good time to mention again how well looked after we were. I'll take this time to say a massive thank you to the coaching team, Simon, Marcel and Chris, for all their work in making it happen, along with everyone else involved in creating these opportunities for us. Whilst I'm on the topic of logistics, one thing worth mentioning regarding what it's like playing for England is that it is very expensive. Travelling to camps every few months obviously isn't cheap, although luckily from a financial point of view, I didn't have to do that as I was obviously in Sweden. Although of course it's a shame that I or anyone else playing overseas can't train that often. Then tournaments, you got flights and maybe some more money for accommodation depending on the event. That being said, this Korea trip was in my opinion pretty bloody good value. Yes, we had to pay for some expensive flights, but otherwise we didn't pay for a thing. The hotel, the food, transport everywhere, everything was paid for. So again, I'm really, really grateful for having got to experience this. Back to the volleyball then. Every game we played so far had been good and competitive. We'd won 2, had a crazy experience against Vietnam taking a bonkers second set. This game though, to be honest, we were outclassed and outplayed. Korea were clearly just a cut above us and to be honest, the rest of the competition. And though we put in a pretty respectable performance, we never really looked like winning. We certainly weren't embarrassed, and for what I remember, Korea had similar games against everyone else. I came on at the end of the first set and put in a fairly standard George when he's nervous performance. Passed pretty well and a couple of useful touches here and there. Not exactly setting the world on fire, but equally no major cock-ups. That evening, we had a team meeting to talk about how the trip had gone, followed by a FIFA tournament in the meeting room, before the next day where we had our final game against Japan in an unofficial third place playoff. The game against Japan was good. Obviously, it didn't have the same spectacle as the previous game. Playing in the second venue we'd used for some training sessions, with Japan kindly volunteering their enormous bench as refs and line judges. But we played well and got the job done 1-3-1. For the most part, we were up comfortably enough for Simon to give lots of people court time, so it was a good showing all round. And that was it for the volleyball. Obviously, I was really disappointed that I didn't feel my best mentally or physically, so I didn't really feel like I'd shown what I could do volleyball-wise. I thought the gap between my level in Korea versus at the camp before the trip was pretty big, but that's part of sport, and it's a great learning experience for how to deal with these feelings and still try and play decent. I can't speak for everyone, but the vibe generally I think was being pretty chuffed with a third place finish. Casting our minds back to the first day before our first game with USA, thinking, uh-oh, we're in danger. And then coming third, I think is a pretty decent showing. Obviously, yes, we're a national team and no one else is, and if America turned up with the actual national team, it'd be a different story. But considering the size disparity of the popularity of volleyball between England and the other countries we're playing, I think we can leave with our heads held high. We weren't heading home just yet though, as we had the final and a closing ceremony to enjoy. To the surprise of no one, Korea won the final against Vietnam pretty comfortably. It felt nice now knowing the volleyball was all done, and my body had survived. I'll go back to Sweden in one piece. After the final, all the teams went down to the court to collect their medals and take photos. Although once this was done, the focus very quickly became trying to arrange shirt swaps with other teams. I think this is one area where we really benefited from being a national team, or maybe people just really like England, I don't know. But either way, it seemed like the England kit was fetching a much bigger price in the bun patty bun closing ceremony shirt swapping market. Relatedly, I'd be remiss not to mention that outside of shirt swapping, we did get a bit of extra attention. Some of the players even getting stopped for autographs or bought presents, all very surreal stuff. Afterwards, there was a farewell dinner with all of the teams. We arrived a little bit early, and opposite the venue was a football stadium. We'd driven past it a ton all week, and have been talking about how it'd be pretty cool if we got the chance to go in and have a look around. So we asked Yellow, do you reckon we can go in and have a nosy? And then it became, oh look, they've let us in, how nice. And then, ooh, the pitch looks good. I wonder if we can go on it. Well, hang on a minute, we're on the pitch.
Do you have a ball?
And then all of a sudden, we're having a penalty shootout and playing headers and volleys. Obviously, mostly this was just entertaining, but, and this might sound a bit silly, this gave me a sense, as much as anything else, of us really being a national team and playing for England. Volleyball obviously isn't that big in England, so I think sometimes it's quite hard to take yourself that seriously. But it's things like this, for me at least, where you get a really cool experience and special treatment because we're the England team, that do help with taking yourself a bit more seriously and feeling a bit prouder to be doing what we're doing. And I think this is something that plagues not just the national team, but English volleyball more generally. where I think we're just a bit insecure about the volleyball we play, and people as a response maybe kind of cringe when they see people sincerely trying hard, and this generally is just going to hold us back in moving forward as a volleyball nation. Anyway, psychology hour over, back to business. The ceremony was fantastic. There was an incredible spread of food, and it's worth mentioning the food generally all week had been amazing. There are a few fun games on the tables, some speeches, a little bit of a boogie, and also unlimited beer, which not surprisingly went down famously. I was on a separate flight back from the rest of the team, obviously going back to Sweden instead of to England. So I said my farewells that evening, and then the next morning, I hitched a ride with one of the other teams back to Seoul, and that was that. So a few final thoughts. As I said, obviously the volleyball didn't quite go according to plan for me, and that is a big shame. I did spend a really large portion of the week feeling both very physically unwell and extremely anxious. However, this was still one of the best experiences I've had in my life, and I'm incredibly grateful to have gotten to be there, and really proud of myself for how I dealt with the anxiety and the illness. To get to travel like this through sport is an utter privilege, and even if the volleyball I played wasn't my best, it was still very enjoyable and amazing experience. And then it was great to be part of the England team that achieved such a good result, putting our best foot forward internationally, really setting things up well for the future. That's everything for this video on career. I've had quite a few comments in the past asking about my experience with the England team, so if you want to know anything I didn't cover, then please let me know in the comments and I'll cover that in future videos. Next up, we're back to Sweden, taking a look at the start of my second season there with a new coach and some new players.